The Blaze Radio Network. On demand.
Glenn Beck.
The Blaze Radio Network.
When you think about what led to the rise of Hitler and the Nazis or the Soviet Union and Stalin or Mao in China, it's easy to look back and wonder, how did people fall in line? How did this all happen? It's kind of like we were talking about yesterday with the Netflix show, The Push. How do you get somebody to murder a innocent person in cold blood in 90 minutes? You have to start small. There's no way any of this could happen today. It's happening in South Africa. What's going on currently in South Africa mirrors the rise of every fascistic or Marxist totalitarian in the last 100 years, to the letter. Last week, the South African Parliament voted to confiscate land from the white farmers without compensation. The time for reconciliation is over. White farmers are about to have their property forcefully seized by government, rapidly headed towards racism, bigotry, and a race war. What is happening in South Africa should chill every person on earth to the bone. Much like the violent and anti-Semitic rhetoric from the German Workers' Party back in the early 1920s, no one in South Africa over the past decade took the issue of land redistribution from white people seriously. And then a man named Julius Malema began proposing it around 2011. But back then, he was just a thug. People thought he was just a racist thug. In 2010, he was kicked out of his political party. He was indicted in court for inciting violence towards white people. One particular political rally he attended, he led the masses gathered in the streets in a song called "Kill the White Man." He spent some time in jail to cool off. Except he formulated a kind of a manifesto while he was in jail. Gee, I wonder if that's ever happened before. He took all of this and created his own political party called the Economic Freedom Fighters. Now, he's a Marxist. It's a Leninist Marxist group that advocates black nationalism. Nationalism is fine. You might think there is no way something like this could go mainstream. It is now the third largest political party in South Africa. Their political pull has grown so much that they were able to convince the entire parliament that we, quote, have to do something. And they did. They did that something that every one of them scoffed at just 7 years ago. They're going down the road of Zimbabwe. Zimbabwe said, well, if the white settlers came here a couple hundred years ago and they just took the land from the black people, then we have the right to do that as well. Now, let's see how it worked out quickly for Zimbabwe. In 1997, before the seizures began, Zimbabwe's economy was one of the strongest in Africa. It was the breadbasket of Africa. Today, after the bloodshed, the horror, and the theft, it now relies on the international community for food for 1/4 of the population. Zimbabwe consistently now has unemployment rates over 90%. The Zimbabwean government is considering retroactively compensating the white farmers with $11 billion. Several years after the farm seizures in 2000, Zimbabwe's economy is in ruins. The agricultural output is an absolute disaster. And now the new Zimbabwean black farmer and farm owners are quietly reaching out to the white farmers who they didn't kill, but just threw off their land and saying, can we partner? Zimbabwe seized 35 million acres of white-owned land. But here's the thing. As all Marxist, Leninist revolutions do, They didn't give that land to the people. They instead gave that land because it was a rightful inheritance of the black man to have that land. Instead, Mugabe gave 40% of those 35 million acres to loyal cabinet ministers, senior army and government officials, and judges. Oh, and he also took 6,500 acres himself. Seizing land and demonizing a select group of people, white, black, straight, gay, Christian, Muslim, it doesn't matter. It is the playbook to power for fascist and radical leftists for decades. Horror and slaughter always follow. After Mao seized the farmland, he went on a mass killing spree because his starving people had to resort to cutting flesh off their own inner thighs and feeding it to their children. One of Mao's greatest admirers, maybe your kids have one of the T-shirts with his face on it, Che, marveled at the way land redistribution led to the furthering of social justice. Che's social justice to Cuban farmers ended up with them staring down the barrels of a firing squad. This is the direction that South Africa is going. On Sunday, the new president of South Africa voiced his plans, and he said, "We're going to be disposing of the white politicians. Quote, we are starting with this whiteness. We are cutting the throat out of whiteness." Meanwhile, crimes against the white farm owners all across South Africa are getting worse and worse. On March 10th, 2017, a 64-year-old woman on a remote farm was assaulted during a 6-hour-long attack. She was burnt with an iron, and a bag was pulled over her head in an attempt to try to smother her. Her feet were impaled with an electric drill, and the attackers threatened to cut off her legs with a grinding machine. In May 2016, a 68-year-old man was cruelly tortured with a towel that was pushed down his throat, and a piece of wire was wrapped around his neck to strangle him. He died during the attack. Boy, this sounds like the 1950s in America. Good! They deserve it! Is that what this leads to? In June 2016, a couple on a remote farm in northern South Africa was burnt with irons during an attack. Robert Lynn, 66, his wife Sue, 64, attacked on their farm 2 o'clock in the morning, February 19th, this last February. Robert was tortured with a knife on his back and his legs, and he was burnt on his feet, his legs, his stomach with a blowtorch. The attackers left Robert in a field, and Sue was found next to the road where she was still alive with a plastic bag bound over her head. She later died in the hospital. I just got a note from a friend who said down the street where he lives, a 68-year-old farmer, a white guy, a mob came to his house. They dismembered him with his wife watching from a window in the house in horror. No help was coming. They had bars on the doors and the windows, and she barricaded herself in, and the mob surrounded her house and burnt it down to the ground with her inside. Boy, that sounds like Poland. No matter where you are in South Africa, you're in Iraq. No matter where you are, if you see your country going down these dark paths, you've got to stand. Dietrich Bonhoeffer, a man who saw his own country deteriorate into evil and hate, said it best. Silence in the face of evil is evil itself. God is not going to hold us guiltless. Not to speak is to speak. Not to act is to act.
Glenn Beck.
The Blaze Radio Network.
Because fanaticism and ignorance is forever busy and needs feeding.
Hello all, this is Starbird, and I disagree. You know what? Fine. Social media is still a garbage fire about this right now, and people seem to want to know more, so today I am going to try and explain, in 10 simple points, why people are wrong about the land expropriations happening in South Africa, and why this whole perspective about it being persecuted natives just taking their land back from evil white oppressors is so frigging wrong. So, the second people start running their mouths about this issue without knowing the first thing about South Africa or its history, please feel free to link them this. Number 1. The original owners of the land are dead. The various wars between the Zulus, Xhosas, and other tribes wiped out most of the natives. The Khoikhoi are long gone, and most of the smaller tribes were also displaced, primarily by the Zulus, in a 25-year-long war of conquest to establish the gigantic Zulu kingdom, which covered about half of the country. This was over 150 years after the first Boers arrived. Number 2. The Boers were there before colonization even really started. The initial Boer settlements were purchased from the Khoi and other smaller tribes who were later wiped out, mostly by the Zulus. While yes, the Boers were not perfect, slavery was still a thing, and I'll get more to this later on, the Boers were actually very peaceful and just wanted to work the land and escape British oppression. Number 3. The Boers were pretty oppressed themselves. The British essentially enslaved the Boers. They took their money and crops for the empire and reserved the right, even when they had their own land, to force them into servitude at any time. And this oppression led to what is known as the Great Trek, when the Boers fled this oppression and headed off into Africa to escape the British. Number 4. Everybody practiced slavery. If you have been following any of these arguments online, you will notice a common tactic to counter the idea of the Boers being in any way sympathetic was that they had slaves. Well, firstly, at this time, slavery was pretty commonplace in a lot of countries. Not even the British had outlawed it yet. There were also a lot of free black people in the colonies. Slavery wasn't a racial thing as much as it was a class thing, as there were a ton of white and Asian slaves too. And finally, the Zulus are well known for selling other tribes to slavers en masse. Slavery was a bad thing, but if you were to wipe out everyone complicit in it, you would basically have no one left in the world. Number 5. When it comes to the natives and the smaller tribes who could be said loosely to own the land, the Zulus did most of the conquest and displacement. Under King Shaka, the Zulus pushed out, enslaved, or wiped out nearly everyone else in about half of the inhabitable lands of South Africa, which in many ways laid out the borders for the provinces we have today. Yes, the British came in and colonized the country later, but mostly they were fighting the Zulus in the Anglo-Zulu War. By that time, there weren't that many other tribes there. Many of those returned much later. Number 6. The Boers fought and died for their land. During the Boer Wars, the Boers fought fiercely for independence, despite the British efforts to not only conquer them, but to exterminate them in a manner reminiscent of Nazi Germany. And that brings us to today. These farms were not taken by conquest. They were purchased or merely settled, as the lands weren't really inhabited at the time. Attacking the Boers is really just attacking another African tribe, and while this is not exactly unheard of in Africa, I thought more people have seen Hotel Rwanda and know that this is a bad thing. Number 7. This is a genocide. The government is very careful to couch this all as expropriation of land and property, but where they are quiet is what they want to happen to the whites after, and exactly how they want to remove them from their property. As to the how, I won't really go into it here since it is very, very graphic, and if you're interested, please feel free to Google it or look at Lauren Southern's excellent coverage of this issue. As to what after, the government actually wants to put whites into camps. I am not joking here. Expropriation of land and property based entirely on race and putting people into camps. I wonder if this has ever happened in history. Number 8. Malema is bad news. Malema, who is becoming essentially the new president, Cyril Ramaphosa's right-hand man right now, is known for his songs about an essential ethnic cleansing of the country.
Alliance, Sibram Konto, Alliance, shoot to kill, Kirawa, shoot to kill, Yamasa, kiss the poor, the farmer, kiss the poor, the farmer.
He is a believer in Azania, a communist ethno-state covering most of Africa, and he and his EFF buddies want to achieve this. Number 9. This will not stop with the Boers, and this is what people don't seem to realize either. There are other racial minorities in South Africa, and Malema does not like them. Always, always, always keep in the back of your mind that he wants Azania, nothing less. Number 10. It is already happening. Lauren Southern has done an amazing job on covering what exactly is going on now. White families being raped, tortured, and murdered, or stripped of their possessions and land and forced into camps to starve. So yeah, what is going on in South Africa right now is disgusting, but what is coming in the next decade could very well be more disgusting still. People need to speak up about this stuff now, because if they don't, you are looking at, and I do not use this term lightly, a potential Holocaust in Southern Africa. In a few generations, we could all be very well reading about this in history books, and the atrocities committed now will be used to justify further atrocities later. At some point, this cycle of hatred and violence has to end. Please, do not hesitate to link this video to anyone who is arguing for this crap on social media. If you want to know more, feel free to check out Lauren Southern's excellent coverage on this issue, or groups like Saitlanders, who are trying to bring attention to and help the white farmers in South Africa. Well, that's me for the day. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, why not stick around? There is plenty more where this came from. You can follow me on Twitter at starbird_tweets, and if you would like to support this channel, you can do so via our Patreon. Thanks very much. Please take care all, and I'll see you next time. This is Starbird, signing off.
Since the end of apartheid, while millions of blacks have been educated and risen out of poverty, South Africa has been dubbed the rape capital of the world by Interpol, with a staggering 1 in 3 South African men admitting to rape. The country is in shambles, government corruption is endemic, the HIV/AIDS rates are among the highest in the world, and life expectancy in that country since 1994 is plummeting. But it is crime, and violent crime, and what former police minister Hathi Nehleko calls a prevailing culture of violence that permeates the blood-soaked streets of South Africa. which saw in 2016 its murder rate increase by a whopping 4.9% year on year, with more than 50 people murdered every day, and a bumbling and incompetent police force that lends to a shockingly low conviction rate of only 10% of those murders. In fact, even among the harshest critics of apartheid, there is an acknowledgement that in many ways the Rainbow Nation under the African National Congress is heading downhill fast. And it is the mismanagement, corruption, and predatory politics practiced at all levels of government that is transforming South Africa into just another failed sub-Saharan country.
Proceed.
Thank you very much, Chairperson. You see, some of us don't know English properly.
Honorable
we
Madisha,
can only come and say
Honorable
hong,
Madisha,
hong, 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 like that.
Honorable
member.
Madisha,
Yes, hong, hong, hong.
Honorable Madisha,
Hong, hong,
Honorable Madisha.
That's the only thing that she knows.
Honorable Madisha,
Yes, thank you.
Honorable Madisha. Yesterday, Honorable Member, yesterday in this House, Honorable Carter, who is your member, raised a point of order around members who were making animal noises. And we asked them to withdraw. And can you please withdraw what you have just done?
I withdraw that.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I withdraw.
Honorable Madisha.
Honorable Chairperson.
An inconvenient fact is that it was whites that built the nation of South Africa, and now that they've handed it over to the black majority, their continued existence in the country looks precarious, so much so that many are openly asking if there is any future for white people in the country their ancestors created. Sub-Saharan Africa since the end of colonization has been one of mass famine, blood-soaked coups d'etats, tribal, ethnic, and civil wars, as well as genocide. This, in turn, is fueling the growing migrant crisis, slamming into Europe via those fleeing their failed societies and producing one of the largest migratory waves in human history. When the apartheid system was abolished in 1994, the African National Congress stepped in and replaced the white ruling party with their own cadres, and for a time, it was business as usual. However, unemployment, crime, and corruption is higher than ever before. And in the meantime, the common dweller in a South African township is no better off today than during the time of the previous white regime. In fact, many would say the steep rise in violent crime, including rape and murder, as well as electricity blackouts and the lack of clean water, have in fact made his lot in life worse. This failure of government competence at all levels is now on full display as in less than 90 days, Cape Town may become the world's first major city to run out of water. And instead of solving or preventing the problem, the chaos and corruption that is South African politics made it worse. Many in Cape Town openly say that the governing ANC party had no interest in preventing a predictable disaster in the only province run by the opposition Democratic Alliance Party, which is the most multiracial party in South Africa and draws its support predominantly from Afrikaans and English-speaking people. Thus, if reserves reach 13.5%, the municipality, which is South Africa's legislative capital, home to the second largest population in the country and the third largest economic hub on the continent, will stop providing piped water to most households and businesses. But this is nothing new. This is just the tip of the iceberg in the corruption-riddled and incompetent governance of the Rainbow Nation. But everyone in South Africa, regardless of color, will say that white people are still riding high. They run the economy, they have a disproportionate amount of influence in politics and the media. But not all of them. Many white South Africans now say that it is becoming harder and harder for them to get a job because of affirmative action policies that cater to the majority, and that whites are now living in poverty in greater numbers, with an estimated 400,000 of them living in squatter camps. But what is absolutely more pressing is that currently, according to the Institute of Security Studies in South Africa, being a white farmer in that country is statistically one of the most dangerous jobs on the planet. In the first 40 days of 2018, there were 41 farm attacks and 5 murders on white farms. What makes these farm murders different from a country that's already swimming in blood is the sheer savagery, barbarism, and inhumanity involved, especially the ubiquitous rape of women and the unnecessary sadism inflicted upon the victims. Moreover, images have now surfaced indicating that perhaps signal jammers are now being used in farm attacks, making it impossible for victims to call for help. And many point to this as being only more evidence that a low-intensity war is being conducted against farmers by trained soldiers, thought to be mostly from the former Zimbabwean army and guerrilla forces in conjunction with local people. The actual number of farmers murdered depends on your sources. Outlets like the BBC predictably say there's no way to really know, and others call it racism to even bring up the fact that whites are being slaughtered by blacks. One thing, however, is for sure, the pressure is building. This is the president of South Africa, Jacob Zuma, singing a variation of Shoot the Boer or Shoot the White Farmer in early 2012 during a celebration by the African National Congress. President Zuma himself, for some time, has called for white land to be expropriated without compensation, and his call has been picked up by the incoming ANC leader, Cyril Ramaphosa, who has made it clear that he wishes to distribute land without compensation as soon as he can gather the needed support to change the constitution. To add to this, in government, along with the ANC, the Economic Freedom Fighters, basically a radical black nationalist party with Marxist leanings, and is the third largest party in the parliament, is also demanding that white land and businesses be seized. Its leader, Julius Malema, who was expelled from the ANC, has urged black South Africans to take the land from white invaders, or what he calls Dutch thugs. In Parliament, he explained that his party wanted to unite black people in South Africa to expropriate white land without compensation. As recently as November 2016, he has magnanimously stated that, in his words, "We are not calling for the slaughter of white people. At least for now." Given that the statements by Malema, the leader of the EFF, that whites will be slaughtered unless they give up all land in South Africa, and this sentiment being echoed by President Zuma and ANC leader Ramaphosa, in terms of land redistribution, the plight of whites in South Africa does indeed, over the long term, look bleak, or in other words, Rhodesia 2.0. And should land confiscations go ahead, a very clear and predictable future for South Africa can be forecasted. Its economic fate will be reminiscent to that of its neighbor Zimbabwe, formerly Rhodesia, where shortly after a similar confiscation of white land, well, it turned the country from the breadbasket of Africa to a basket case as food production plummeted and the economy disintegrated into a hyperinflationary vortex. It took Zimbabwe 15 years to admit their mistake, and they are now begging white farmers to return. Given the track record of general failure in post-colonial Africa and the very clear and present example of Zimbabwe, and in articles written in the prestigious Foreign Policy magazine, there is not a single successful black nation anywhere on earth, and this should give the leaders of South Africa pause. And given the penchant for grotesque violence and genocide instigated by not only security services, but average citizens in African countries, Rwanda being a very good example of this, there have now been calls for whites to be allowed the right of return to Europe. And given the collaborative media silence that attends the ongoing disintegration of post-apartheid South Africa, it's astounding that the vaunted and hopelessly leftist legacy media, including the BBC, are now openly asking if white people have a future in Africa. But even with all this, and with the targeted ethnic murders, the discriminatory affirmative action laws for the majority, and the continual threats of genocide and land confiscation by their own government, countries like Canada, as late as 2017, have refused asylum requests by white Afrikaners because concerns for their children or their mothers being assaulted and raped was, in the Canadian Immigration and Refugee Board's words, based on patently unreliable racist propaganda. A government lawyer for the CIRB said that fear of white children being raped by blacks was, in their words, highly offensive, as the information the family relied on was, quote, white supremacist hate literature, unquote, that should be ignored. With no help coming and with no one to take them in, and being told that they are racist and bigots for even trying to protect their families from murder, and with their own government against them, what's most important now is getting information like this out about what's happening to this persecuted minority that is constantly being threatened with genocide by the majority of their countrymen as well as by their very own government. See Lauren Southern's new documentary for a look into the farm murders in particular. And if you haven't done so already, you need to contact your local congressman or member of parliament and demand that they get up to speed about what is happening in South Africa. We also need to put real pressure on President Trump. Maybe start a hashtag on Twitter, he seems to always be there, to not only perhaps intervene in South Africa, but also stop a planned $310.5 million in foreign aid to a country whose rulers have not only driven it into the ground, but threatened to massacre the minority that created it in the first place, and because of global pressure, including the entire Western world, handed it over to them. I myself have restarted a petition that asks for South Africans to be allowed the right of return to European nations. Please add your name to it. Information is in the description. Or start your own for Canada, Australia, New Zealand, or the United States. Post-apartheid, post-Mandela South Africa has a choice. It can either use the talent and knowledge of all of its people to try and build a better society for everybody, or it can confiscate the land and businesses of its white minority and fracture into a racial and tribal war and join the rest of sub-Saharan Africa as its newest failed state. Ironically, many of which are now being economically colonized by an assertive China, a China that has little care for democracy, human rights, and even human life.
During my investigation into South Africa's farm murders, I've heard plenty of stories, but there is one woman in particular who has seen it all. Eileen de Jager is one of the famous Blood Sisters, a pair of crime scene cleaners who have dealt with the aftermath of more farm murders than anyone else. I wanted to find out if some of the more gruesome stories I've heard about could even possibly be true, and what the Blood Sister herself thought of the crime wave sweeping South Africa.
You never get used to cleaning up crime scenes, especially farm murders. You don't get used to it. The torture that we find have been done on these farm murders are unbelievable. We found pieces of nails being pulled out. We found hands being removed from bodies. We found people raped, brutally murdered, babies, children, the farmers trying to protect their families, and there's just no stopping. The farm murders are brutal. Rolene and I went to this farm murder scene in the northwest, and we came upon this beautiful white house, and everywhere you looked was blood splatter. Since from where you walked in, there was blood against the curtains, the walls, the paintings, the floor, and you could see where two babies were murdered in the bathroom. So they were They were definitely attacked while giving the babies a bath. One of them actually survived and crawled all the way from the bathroom. He was about 2 years old. Crawled all the way from the bathroom to the main bedroom where the mom was murdered. She was dragged to the bedroom, raped and killed, and then the one baby was murdered in the bath and the other one got out and crawled. And he died there by her side. That was a very terrible one. Another one that stays with me is in Johannesburg, just outside Johannesburg. We had a farm murder where 5 people came in. It was arranged by their domestic worker. And they drowned the 12-year-old boy in boiling hot water. So we had to remove the skin from the bath as it was peeling off him in the hot water. That was a terrible scene.
What's particularly bizarre about the crime in South Africa towards white farmers is much of it is played off as simply robberies gone wrong. But one has to wonder how you can accidentally torture an entire family, accidentally cut someone's eyes out, or accidentally rape them for days. The crimes in this country seem to take on a far more wicked nature than those in most of the world.
It's not about robbing or stealing. It's been classified, especially on the crime stats as well, that it's attacks or robberies, burglaries. But because there is no statistic for farm murders currently in South Africa, the brutality of the farm murders in South Africa is undescribable. The things that you see on farm murders, the torture, the time it took to do the killings, the brutality and the ongoing torture is unbelievable. People's eyes are being removed, parts of their bodies, limbs being raped with objects, not even by themselves. I think if you look at the worst movies ever made, it's not really a patch against what is really going on there.
I wanted to find out what could motivate such gruesome attacks, but given their sensitive work with the South African police, a state-controlled force, Eileen made it clear she wasn't able to answer certain questions.
90% of the increase we found is due to unemployment, racial discrimination, and there's no hope. If you don't start your own business in South Africa, where are you going to work? There's no work.
Racial discrimination against who, if you don't mind me asking?
I have to be careful. Yeah,
because
I have to be a little bit careful.
We work very closely with government. Racial discrimination against...
No, it's okay.
We have to be so careful.
Even if she couldn't comment on this, with the government nearly ignoring the issue altogether, and certainly not releasing research on it, one can only speculate on motives. But one thing that is becoming certain is that things are getting worse.
They started weekly. We would get one call a week to come and assist at either farm attack or farm murder. Now it's daily. It's definitely daily. It's increased unbelievably.
Hearing these stories from the Blood Sisters is not an easy thing to do. Believe me, I have these just horrific, evil images that they described burned into my memory. But when the South African government refused to publicly discuss this problem and potential solutions to it, and even seem willfully ignorant of it, just playing it off as simple burglaries, we have to do the job that the government and the mainstream media won't, and talk about this issue now, because otherwise we are going to be hearing a lot more of these dreadful tales. South Africa's white working class is going through an intense crisis. In the last 2 decades, the number of whites living in poverty in the country has been increasing steadily. With the ruling African National Congress introduction of black economic empowerment laws that seek to place black workers ahead of ethnic minority workers, many white South Africans have fallen on hard times, finding themselves living in what are colloquially known as white squatter camps. After hearing about an orphanage that was cut off from its financial support for being too white, I visited one such site to find out what kind of life many white South Africans are being forced to live.
Yeah, well, the place is about people that haven't got place to stay, that stays on the street. So we help them, and especially women that is abused with children, and we help them with that. That is what we are doing here. So, and from the public side outside, we don't get any support. So the men here, we are working. We love to do it because, especially women and children, they don't get any support from the government. We don't get anything. We haven't got power or lights, electricity we haven't got here. There's this one guy staying here. Look at this room. One guy.
If this didn't exist, where would these people go?
They will be on the street. They will be on the street.
This squatter camp just outside Johannesburg is one of the many across South Africa and is home to some of the country's most disadvantaged people. It is built on the site of an old dumping ground and is home to around 60 people, most of whom are children. Many of the people who live here have been through some of the worst situations and have been failed by the police, social services, and even charities designed to help South Africa's poorest. Yeah, why couldn't you go to one of the hostels that the government has set up?
Because of the skin color. Yeah, and yeah, it's not well. We just help white people, yeah, because there's no other place that does it. You know, if you go to there's many places I know, Jesus Disciples, Manger, those places they take blacks and they put the whites out. You see, so yeah, that's about it.
So wait, there are places here that will only help blacks but won't help whites?
Yeah, that's true.
Can you tell us a little bit more about that? People find that a very bizarre idea in America.
Yeah, I don't know how to say it. It's just the racism going around.
I'm just here to get my life in order and try to give my daughter a better life.
Were there any other places you could have gone other than here?
No.
Why not?
Nobody else didn't want to help. I've tried a lot, and at the end of the day, Uncle Kubus was the only one that took me in.
Are there no government programs?
Nothing.
It's the only place who could help us with place to stay and things. They are the only ones who helped us with it. No one else wanted.
If it wasn't for them, I would have been in the streets. I want to sleep with my wife and my kids on the street. That's it.
There's no one who can help us. Because this side of the earth it's bad for us. And I'm not lying, it's bad. No one can get jobs around here, we're suffering badly.
Well, where we lived, things were very dangerous. The one day, there was black people walking in the street, and they shot through our windows. And I went, and the police did nothing.
You can't even walk in the streets around. At night, during the day, they always rape you or they beat you up. They're swearing at you in the language. They know you don't know the language, but they will come and swear at you, breaking you down around you. You don't feel like a person around you anymore. So they're making sure our people, we don't have a life anymore. They will make sure about it.
Have you tried to look into leaving South Africa?
If I can get a chance, I will go. If I can get a better life that side of the seas, I will go. Me and my 2 kids, I need a life to make for them.
In fact, the people here are often refused help based solely on their race. Miss Grace, the de facto mother of the camp, told me how one resident was refused treatment at a hospital because of his white skin, while others were refused a place at a local school for the same reason. In fact, the school asked how many black people were at the camp before refusing based on the fact that there weren't enough.
He told on the TV, on the news, shoot the Boer, kill the Boer. What we are like, just living also, we are also human beings. We also got a life, we are like human beings just like them, just the color in the language is different. But why are they against us? Even black kids were beating my kids up, my 5-year-old. Told them this is not for you anymore. South Africa, it's for ours. For them. And that's why we're like this. I don't want to give my kids a life like this. I want to give them what they need, and I can't. I'm fed up with this country now.
So without this place open, where would these kids be?
They will be on the streets.
This camp isn't like the refugee camps that you see across Europe for illegal migrants. The people here are largely women and children. They want to work. They haven't illegally crossed any borders, and they're trying to do things right. Yet they live like this within their own nation. And while the world touts their love for refugees, because of their skin color, the white minority in South Africa has been forgotten. Thank you so much for watching this video. I just wanted to let you know that this is actually just a short clip from a much larger documentary project I'm working on called Farmlands. Now, there are a million ways you can help with this project and spread the word about the situation going on in South Africa. If you want to know how you can do that, go down to the links below or visit farmlands.online. I'll see you next time. Tell me what you gonna do.